You've probably heard the term ignorance is bliss, but have you stopped to consider what it actually means or if it's even true? I know for myself, there's been times when ignorance has definitely not been bliss, and I wished I've had more information before proceeding.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that would be true of me.
For sure.
So, what's the point of a saying like this? I think maybe it's that when you don't know something, you can't be expected to act upon it, either positively or negatively. But once you
Yeah.
know, it's expected to inform your action. And we saw in our homework yesterday with Nicodemus that Jesus didn't allow him to feign either lack of knowledge or understanding as his barrier. Jesus made sure that Nicodemus knew that it was the implied cost of his knowledge that he was avoiding. And knowing the deepest part of each heart, Jesus knew exactly what Nicodemus was feeling. And so he continued painting this picture for Nicodemus that left no room for misinterpretation. So, what were Jesus' next words then to Nicodemus?
So Jesus says to him in verses 14 and 15 of chapter 3 that just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, and everyone who believes in him may have eternal life.
So, what Old Testament passage is he quoting here?
He's pointing Nicodemus to Numbers 21. And Numbers 21 takes place when the people of Israel, they're nearing the end of their 40 years in the wilderness, and they grow impatient. So they speak against God and against Moses, and they say, "Why have you brought us out of Egypt into this wilderness to die? There's no bread, there's no water. We detest this miserable food." And so God sends venomous snakes among them. And as the people are bit, many of them start to die. And so the people come to Moses and they say, "We've sinned against God and against you. And so please pray on our behalf that God will take these snakes away." And so Moses prays and God says, "Okay, here's the solution. Make a snake, put it up on a pole, and any people of Israel who look at this snake, they'll live." And so Moses, he takes and makes a snake out of bronze, he puts it up on a pole, and whoever looks at this bronze snake after they've been bitten, they live.
So, why does Jesus reference this passage at this point in his conversation with Nicodemus? What's he trying to tell him here?
So he's saying to Nicodemus that his spiritual condition is the same as the physical condition of those Israelites. Those snake bitten Israelites could know all about the healing power of the bronze snake that Moses had erected in their midst. But if they didn't believe it enough to actually turn their gaze upon it and lift their eyes towards it, this knowledge did them no good. Jesus, just like God gave his people a solution to physical death in the wilderness, he's offering a solution of spiritual death to anyone who will receive it and believe. Jesus offered this solution, eternal life, to Nicodemus.
Yeah, and Jesus, he knew the impact of that long ago snake bite on humanity. He knew that that serpent in the garden brought death just as surely as the serpents in the wilderness did. And because he knew it, he acted on it. And we see that God provided a permanent and a complete antidote to sin and death. And this is beautifully displayed for us in one of the most beloved and familiar verses of all, John 3:16, where it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him won't perish, but will have eternal life." And so God gave his son up to be like that bronze serpent, that anyone who looks to him, that is the enduring answer, the comprehensive cure for sin.
Well, and here we see, as we do many times throughout the Gospel of John, where Jesus, or John, I guess, turns the spotlight from Jesus onto his listeners. And when we're confronted with these truth claims of Jesus, we need to respond. So, what we hear in verse 19 is the verdict, and it says, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil." So, what is the message or meaning behind Jesus' words here? Again, what's he saying to Nicodemus?
He's saying that if we don't accept the antidote that Jesus is offering, we'll be in the same boat as Nicodemus. spiritually dead and unable to save ourselves from eternal death. We've probably all felt exposed by the light of Christ's righteousness. So often we choose to remain in the dark, where we can hide our flaws and imperfections. We comfort ourselves in that we can compare ourselves to others instead of to Christ. So we try to hold on to the darkness by believing that ignorance really is bliss. For me personally, I felt confident in the dark, standing before the court of public opinion. But when I think about standing before the judge of all the earth, it turns the light on my true condition. I'm guilty.
Well, and I think that's the key, right? Knowing the benchmark. And I've acted just like Nicodemus many times, setting the world as my benchmark instead of setting it as Christ. And when I do that, I think that I'm good enough. But as followers of Christ, we're called to a much higher standard. And we see evidence of this in our passage today. Jesus moves from exposing the motives and desires of Nicodemus to shining a spotlight on the heart of John the Baptist. So what contrast do we see between these two individuals here?
I think the biggest contrast between them is how they approach Christ. Nicodemus, he comes to Jesus in confidence. He thinks that he has all the answers. And so Jesus exposes the shaky foundations that his answers are resting on. But then we have John the Baptist. And I think we forget too often that John, he was also born into privilege. He was set apart from before he was born to carry out this important mission. And when the angel came to his father Zachariah, we can see in Luke 1:15 and 16 that this angel tells his dad that at his son's birth, many would rejoice because he would turn the hearts of the people of Israel back to God. And so John the Baptist has been told that people are going to listen to him. He is going to have influence. And yet we see in contrast to Nicodemus, he is content to be great in the eyes of God rather than working hard to be great in the eyes of man.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting to note that in Matthew 11 and Luke 7, we read that after living a whole life on mission for God, John the Baptist ends up in prison. Instead of feeling confident that his mission is complete, he struggles with doubt. He questioned if Jesus really was the Messiah and whether or not his mission was indeed complete. But John had enough faith to take action. He sent some of his disciples to Jesus to ask if he was the one that they'd been waiting for, or whether they should be looking for someone else. Jesus sees John's heart, and he doesn't condemn him for doubting, but rather commends John for his belief in front of the same crowd that heard about John's doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and these are the words that Jesus spoke to that crowd. We can read them in Luke 7, verses 24 to 28. Jesus says, "What did you go out into the desert to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear expensive clothes and indulge in luxury are in palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. I tell you, among those born of women, there is no one greater than John." And so, friends, our greatness in God's eyes is not based on what we've done or how we're seen by others. It's in how we respond to his revelation of himself. And so that's what we would leave you reflecting on today. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.